His program, The Human Element, A New Vision in Nature, James Balog.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for attending. I come to you as not just a photographer and a filmmaker, but as an alpinist, as a scientist, and as a global traveler. And what I've come to realize over the course of my work for the past 40 years is that there's this, when you can find it, when you can walk on this beam, there's a wonderful combination that fuses together art and science. Now, art, as we know, we're in the photographic arts here in some fashion or another. Art is kind of left brain. It's the visual, subjective, often unconscious, intuitive way that the human animal engages with the experience around it. Science is the more right brain, sorry, the art is left brain, and the science is the right brain part. It's the more rational, quantitative, analytical way of looking at the world. And one of the big problems in Western civilization has been that art and science have generally been conceived until relatively recently as being separate ways of looking at the world. But when you can bring those two things together, fuse them together, bring the two halves of the human mind and human experience together, you can get a whole intensified understanding of the way the world works that you don't have if you're just looking at things in an atomized way. So let me find the clicker. Here we go. Now, how many of you have heard of something called plate tectonics? Plate tectonics, anybody? Okay, good. Those are the forces that crack the planet's crust and move the slabs of rock of the Earth around into different places, and it builds volcanoes and mountains. We get that, okay? These are natural tectonics that come out of the inherent forces of the Earth. And by the way, I just came just now, last night, very, very late from Hawaii. I was working on this same volcano. It's not erupting right now, but I was photographing the aftermath of the eruptions, and my baggage is lost somewhere out over the Pacific, so I'm in the stuff I came off the volcano with right here. And of course, these natural tectonics create lava and crack the planet's crust with earthquake faults. Natural tectonics. I've come to realize, however, that there's another force afoot in the world, and this is what it is. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen up here. Okay, so natural tectonics, and there's this other force, human tectonics. Humans are a force of nature too, along with earth, air, fire, water, the geophysical forces of the planet's crust. And what's all that about? Well, if you take the size of human populations and you multiply it by our survival needs, our desire for affluence, and our technology, you wind up with an effect that I call human tectonics. Now, in case it isn't clear by now, I'm interested in showing you the mission that I'm on rather than necessarily talking about the photographic process per se, but I'll have a number of photographic process things to share with you here over time. But mostly I see this conversation just now as being about how we look at the world, how we see the world, how we comprehend the world, and therefore how we react to the world. So human tectonics have given rise, human tectonics are the forces that alter the world. And those forces have given rise to this big fancy term in modern science, which is pronounced Anthropocene. And this notion that has become current in the sciences just in less than the past 20 years is that we're living in a new epoch of geologic time that is characterized by human alteration of the basic operating systems of the planet. Brian Scarry's work with the changing ocean is a fantastic representation of that. If we're changing the basic chemistry of the ocean water, that's a big systemic change in the planet. That's the Anthropocene time happening as a consequence of human tectonics, and I'll show you more about that here as we go on. So I'd like to tie together a little graphic view of how people change some of the primal elements of the Anthropocene. First of all, we dig up earth materials called oil, coal, natural gas. And we burn them, and we dump them into the air. We dump the effluent of that burning into the air, I mean to say. And we, in so doing, change the composition of the air, the heat in the air, the behavior of the air, and that in turn alters what's going on with the water, whether it's fresh water on land, it's the clouds, or it's the seawater. So these things are connected. And the next thing that happens is we have an alteration of the wildfire regimes on the planet. And if any of you live in California, you've been acutely sensitive this summer and last summer to the consequences of the changing wildfire regime. That's all coming out of these relationships I just showed you. So let's dig in, if you'll excuse the pun, into the earth element. So if we take ancient buried plant and animal life, and it's still decomposing, creating gases, creating oozy oil, we drill or dig down into it and we bring it up to daylight. We burn something like 5.3 billion tons of coal per year. This happens to be a coal seam in western Pennsylvania, happens to be a coal seam that my own grandfather, my father's father, mined in. I didn't realize that until we were there a year and a half ago shooting a segment for our new film, The Human Element. So just to be clear, when you have a typical photographer or a typical environmentalist or a typical scientist standing up in front of you talking about coal, oil, and natural gas, the assumption is that that person is being critical and pejorative, and I'm not being that. I acknowledge that my prosperity today, in fact, my own opportunity to be standing in this room today, is a consequence of the fact that my grandfather was digging in that coal mine 70 years ago, and in fact, he died in that coal mine when the roof collapsed. So I'm connected to that, and we're all connected to this Anthropocene process of burning these fossil fuels. The electrons pouring out of those lights up there are coming probably because there's a coal-fired power plant somewhere down the road burning up coal. So we're all connected to this thing. So I acknowledge that I'm not standing outside this difficult relationship. I acknowledge that I'm in and of it, just as we all are. These two Coltrane pictures happen to have been in Murmansk, Russia this past summer, as they were offloading coal from some local mines, and they were shipping it off to who knows where. They were about to load it into the tankers. And then, of course, there's oil, which we burn 34 billion barrels of annually. This shot happens to have been done down at the Gulf oil spill, whenever that was, 2010. 2010? Was that? Yeah. So, moving onward. I also wanted to look at air. And because I skipped over this right in the beginning, I didn't land on it, I want to land on it now. This show, The Human Element, is a small piece of a movie that we just finished called The Human Element. And that film was finished this fall. It had its official premiere at the San Francisco Film Festival in April. It's about to have its online distribution premiere on January 29th. On iTunes, on Amazon, on Google+, and on half a dozen other venues. And I hope you'll all use the opportunity to see it someday, The Human Element. Anyway, when we were shooting The Human Element, we were almost done with the field work, and we had this segment on air. And we needed something else in the air story to bring it alive a little bit more. And I had always had this idea in my head about putting a camera in a weather balloon. And some of you know me as a time-lapse guy. I've done a lot of time-lapse with cameras on glaciers all around the polar and alpine universe. So I had this idea that I would put a time-lapse camera in a big weather balloon and send it up into outer space. Because I thought, well, I've always wanted to be an astronaut, but I will never be an astronaut. So at least I can send my little surrogate eye up there for me. So turned out, it's a long story, I was buying some shoes actually one day at Nordstrom's, And the woman who was helping me out said, you know, you're James Balog. My husband is a physicist at NOAA, and he knows how to put weather balloons up into outer space. You guys ought to meet each other. And I said, well, he needs to be my new best friend. So he and I teamed up, and the same thing that they put weather instruments on, we put a camera on there and sent it up. And the camera was shooting every second all the way up to 99,700 feet. And then the camera, then the balloon exploded. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger as the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner. It explodes, and the camera came back to Earth on a parachute. This is the last picture it shot at 99,700 feet, looking down on Denver over here, the Rocky Mountains way down below at 14,000 feet, and that thin little prism of the atmosphere right there. That was a view that this homeboy never thought he was going to have in his life because he's not an astronaut. But my little robot surrogate got that for us. So the camera comes shooting down at 125 miles an hour on this little plastic parachute, and it landed out in a prairie field almost in Kansas, and we had wrapped it in bubble wrap, and it was just fine. Nikon cameras, once again. But back to air. Air is a tangible, dimensional, physical substance, but we can't see it. Right now, as you sit here, you've got 14 plus pounds of air per square inch pressing on your shoulders. It's the weight of the air. If we could see air, if we could really feel air, I believe we'd be having a whole different conversation about questions of the natural environmental change, climate change, and all the rest of it. But air is this abstraction, and we just dump our waste products into it, and therefore we have a flawed idea of what it's really all about. But let me show you something we checked out. Now, this is just east of the Rockies. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I put a camera up in a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration tower called the BAO tower that's observing the air and collecting air samples. We're looking northeast. I'm about 10 miles east of the foot of the Rockies. We're looking northeast out over the Great Plains. And we always think that, oh boy, isn't this great? We live in this wonderful, clean part of the world where the air is always pure and fresh. Guess what? We set the time-lapse camera going and discovered from the visual evidence that many, many, many days are less than perfectly idyllic and clear and blue. We've got tailpipe emissions, power plant emissions, what are called fugitive emissions coming from the effluent in the oil and gas drilling fields I'm about to show you. All of this stuff is contributing to degradation of the air, and on top of it, the particulates from the wildfires. Wildfires that go all the way up into the Canadian subarctic, all the way out to California, all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. All this stuff blows thousands of miles across our landscape. Now, the process of putting the cameras up in that tower blew me away, because I had heard that there were a lot of pump jacks in oil and gas drilling operations and extraction operations out east of Boulder in this area called Weld County. I hadn't realized how ubiquitous they were. Inside every one of these circles, which are no more than about 2 miles away, are various drilling facilities and handling facilities. This is what some of them look like. 3 drill rigs on a farm drilling in a rock called the Niobrara Shale. Evidence, eyewitness. You know, that's been my story. That's been what I feel like I was put here to do, to be a witness, to collect evidence, and to document the case of what's going on in our world. Okay, so that shot that I showed you looking out through the polluted air was down here. All of these green dots are active wells, 23,000 of them right now. And there's all these emissions that come because of the drilling processes, and because the fact is that the wellheads and the pipes and the casing are not airtight. And over time, something on the order of 5 to 40% of these wells leak in a matter of 20 or 30 years. and there's stuff going in the air. There's methane coming out of the ground, going straight into the air from all these holes that are poked in the surface of the Earth. These, obviously, abandoned. I don't know how many dots there are there. I can tell you that the green ones are 23,000. So there is a lot of opportunity. And once you drill a well through the surface of the Earth's crust, you can't undrill it. There's always the potential for those things leaking, even when they pour concrete or attach steel to the top of those wells. They generally wind up leaking. All right, moving onward, water. We have a changing relationship with water. Now, everybody can understand this basic relationship within human tectonics. When you warm the atmosphere, it converts solid ice into water. You've understood that ever since you were a year old. This is up on the surface of the Greenland ice sheet. And when I first went to Greenland, I was so excited to see the place, but I never imagined that I would be seeing these watery features all over it. The water melts and it carves these gigantic channels. You can see my assistant Adam Lewinter up there on the top right to give you a sense of scale. These channels of meltwater grind their way through the ice sheet, and they wind up running out through the bottom of the ice out to sea. Now, of course, as the tongues of ice flow off the ice sheet, you wind up with these icebergs breaking off into the ocean, carrying water out. Okay? Not hard to understand that. Fantastic things. You can photograph this stuff forever and never get tired of it. It's incredibly beautiful. And I cut myself off on the pictures here too soon. But the point is that block by block by block, the icebergs break down, and as they break down and flow out into the ocean, they become part of global sea level rise. And global sea level rise is approximately 1/8 of an inch per year, depending on where you are. It's a long story, but the ocean is going up because water is changing from a solid state on land to a liquid state in the ocean. That's happening because of the retreat of ice in the mountain glaciers across most of the world, in the Greenland ice sheet, and in parts of Antarctica. So we're changing the dynamics of the sea and the water that's in the sea. So having seen some of these things happen in the world, I put out 25 time-lapse cameras back in 2007. And they are bolted to bedrock alongside these glaciers. And I consulted with these scientific specialists to say, where should I put my cameras to see what's happening in these different places? We started with 25. We wound up putting up as many as 43 at one point. Cameras in Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Canada, Austria, Nepal, and the Antarctic Peninsula. We just finished our 12th field season, in spite of the fact that I originally thought it would only be a 3-year project. Just finished field season 12. The project is going on indefinitely as far as I can tell. And we've so far collected something like 1.5 million frames as the cameras shoot every half hour around the clock as long as it's daylight. They were originally Nikon D200s. This picture was shot in March of 2007, right before they all went in the field the first time. We modified pelican housings with these little windows and bolted to various kinds of brackets that go onto bedrock. And then, of course, solar panels are collecting energy from the sun, goes into a battery. Custom-made computer timer inside the housing tells the camera when to fire. And I thought this would be really easy to engineer this, but it was the bane of my existence for about 3 years until we got everything shaken down and working right. But it works, and these cameras endure 150-mile-an-hour winds, temperatures down to -40, driving snow and rain, just generally ferocious conditions. We have to go out and download the cameras once a year, physically, swap out the flash cards, replace them, and put together the time lapse that shows you what happened. It's a big project. Lots of scientists. Famous mountaineer Conrad Anker works on this project with us. My wife Suzanne is up there on the top right because this project has totally overtaken her life, and without her tender, loving support, I could not be doing this. Brian knows about that. Got to have a tender, loving wife at home. And you've heard about Sport, my office manager, production manager of 28 years. That's her. Still the solid anchor back in the office. When I'm getting ready to go on the stage here at CES and I'm calling her saying, what the hell? She's the one who takes care of it. This is where the cameras are right now. And this is what it looks like. Anybody know what that mountain is up there in the top left? Everest, very good. He's quick on the draw. It's Mount Everest up there. The Khumbu Glacier and the Everest Base Camp for the South Col route is right here. The camera is bolted onto a cliff face at 19,000 feet, and it looks into the Khumbu icefall and watches how that river of ice is moving. Up to Iceland to show you just a perfect example of what the cameras have seen over time. This is a glacier called the Solomajökull, and this begins at 2007. One of the huge surprises of this project was to discover that we would be watching rivers and lakes forming in the course of this exercise. That was something I never, ever imagined. That's history happening right now in front of our cameras while we're sitting here. It's experiencing the world and messing around with cameras. Now there's a lake where there once was ice. So of course, through the magic of photography, we can put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We turn time backwards to where that glacier was, 2007. 2018. We have several other camera positions around this glacier, but this is the one that we generally show audiences. So let me show you some repeat pairs. This is just going back, shooting one frame at the same spot. 2009, Coast Range of British Columbia. This is up in the air in a helicopter. Very hard to find the right spot. It may not be correct within a couple of yards, but it's really close. Another British Columbia glacier. Beautiful thing called the Tahumming. I love this glacier. When we found it, we went back 2017, bada boom, glacier gone. A glacial tarn, as geologists call them, has been left behind. The Trift Glacier in Switzerland. Need to go back and shoot that again this summer because that whole last little bit of ice will undoubtedly have disappeared. And one last time lapse. This is up in southeast Alaska, the Mendenhall Glacier. So remember what you see there. Glacier was right in front of the camera. Time marches forward. And once again, turn time backwards. The red line is where the ice began. Staggering. Without the memory of the camera, this stuff would just disappear and poof, we wouldn't even know it was gone. But that's the miracle of photography, and I never really appreciated it until we worked on this very glacier. That here is this thing that's disappearing, and its life is stored on that little compact flash card. But this is the evidence, this is the solid, tangible, visible, comprehensible evidence of how the world is changing. And there's some of those blocks of ice turning into sea level rise. So, what happens? The sea level raises. This is in Charleston, South Carolina during a hurricane. this should be a nice intact neighborhood. The hurricane drove the waters up so high that it crested the seawall and the whole neighborhood flooded. So the ice goes from solid up in the cold places to liquid all over the world, and the coastline conditions are being rearranged. Hurricane Katrina had a lot more water that was available to be driven in by the storm when the storms came because there was more of a battering ram in the ocean. Real world human consequences. Hurricane Irma, 2017, St. Augustine, Florida. Lots more water. It wasn't a huge hurricane when it hit this part of the coast, but there was enough more water. It cut away at the underpinnings of a lot of these houses. Here's a time lapse in Norfolk, Virginia. Nice suburban neighborhood that floods on a regular basis in the autumn. Comes up through the storm drains, tops over the seawalls. And there it is. That's the new world that we're living in. Chesapeake Bay. There's a town called Tangier out on this island, and this gets flooded every autumn on the high tides. And one of the local moms has a very poignant quote in our film, and she says, "We're one part away from becoming a part of history. All they need is one big hurricane to come up the Chesapeake, and it'll take out this entire town, 700 people." So, on to fire. I hear Bohemian Rhapsody over there. What's going on? Okay, back on fire. So we have more fires, we have bigger fires. This is tangible evidence. It's been well studied. If you put chemicals in the air that changes the way heat is retained at the Earth's surface, it dries out the plants. It creates different kinds of weather conditions that create more lightning. And this has been well studied, well understood, and this is the environment we're living in the American West. Direct connection between more heat, that's in yellow, and the number of large fires over time. You can see them rising quite obviously and consistently. At the same time, it's fantastic stuff to look at. These fires are phenomenally beautiful. They're phenomenally scary, but incredibly gorgeous as photographic subjects, if you can get the access to them. We spent, what was it, 3 years or 4 years in the summer shooting these fires. We all got trained as firefighters in order to work in these places. We have certificates and all that stuff. I'll show you a picture of myself after I got beaten up one summer. These firefighters are heroes. You hear a lot of sort of light pablum chatter about that during these summer fire cycles, but I can tell you, having been out there with those guys and seen how hard they work and how tough the work is, it's brutal. They're on 2-week shifts, bent over with heavy tools going like this. That's what they do most of their lives. And for that reason, they're mostly young people, young men, and their lungs get filled full of carbon particles, and they wind up essentially getting black lung disease the way the coal miners do if they spend enough years out on these fires. I and one of my team members wound up with pneumonia as a consequence of working on these fires too. And this was me at the end of a grim day in a fire called Happy Camp in Northern California. And to give you a little backstory here, this kind of fireproof fabric is called Nomex. And it's what fighter pilots wear in their suits. And the idea is that if you have a fire in the cockpit and you're trying to get out through flaming fuels, or if you have embers falling on you, this stuff is resistant to flame. And that's good. That's fine. I've had a lot of embers fall on me during these fires, but I What I didn't realize is that the Nomex also acts as a thermos bottle. It keeps all your heat in by your skin. So in a typical July, August fire in California, along the edge of the Great Valley, you're working in air temperatures that are 100 to 105 degrees. The ground facing south heats up to about 130 or 140, so you're walking on that. And then all you have to do is get up right next to the fire and have these radiant fireballs spewing heat at you, and you just feel like your skin is going to melt off your face. I'm now, I'm sure, officially too old to do this kind of work anymore. I feel like I only touched about 30% of the pictures that I could have, should have, would have gotten on this series, but it's all this tired old broken body can handle anymore, so I have to call it quits. But that gives you a little taste of what I looked like after a bad day. So here is the trailer for The Human Element that gives you a sample of the broader narrative. This is a full-length feature documentary, and as I say, it will be screening on January 29th on iTunes and a number of other sites online. And then I'll come back with a couple ideas.
The most severe conditions.
When I became a photographer, here we go, I wanted to celebrate the elegance and beauty of nature. But I soon realized there was a more complex story going on in the world.
Very powerful force of Mother Nature.
About the collision between people and nature. And I felt a great sense of urgency to bear witness to that.
We need to get out of here because the water is rising around us.
As you can see, the water is just tearing it to pieces.
Front Range is still under an ozone action alert.
The majority of our kids are struggling with air.
In the United States, we have a fire problem.
The fire was huge and spread really fast.
These are wildfires we have no control over.
Little tornado right there.
We depend on the stability of the fundamental forces of the world. Earth.
When you work in the mine, coal becomes part of you.
Air.
You're most definitely afraid of the air that you're breathing in.
Water.
Water and the folks on Tangier, we're joined, we're connected.
Fire.
Just respect it and maybe live a little longer.
And the fifth element, people. An imbalance in one element leads to an imbalance in another. People are the only elements that can choose to restore balance.
Good things come to people who hustle.
And that gives me hope.
We need the help, and we need it pretty quick.
We're one storm away from becoming a part of history.
Our deeds are leaving their imprint in the fabric of time. And what I want to do is bring this story to life.
Thank you. Two last thoughts. Vision. Vision. We're in this building because of vision. We may be in this building to mess with pixels and lenses and so on, but the real point is vision. We need new visual ideas brought into this world. We need to use our passion, our stamina, our skills, our insight to reveal the truth of what's going on in the world to our fellow human beings in the hopes that we can move forward on a better path. And if you want to know what you can do, it always comes back to the same thing. Amy talked about it a couple hours ago. You use your voice. Each one of us has a voice. We have an actual verbal voice, but you have a voice called the camera. You have a voice called how you spend your money. You have a voice called how you try and influence your friends, how you hope to try and influence politics, how you vote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all have a role to play in this. The climate problem came about one tailpipe at a time, one smokestack at a time, and we have to do what we can to push the tide of history in a better direction incrementally, piece by piece by piece. So I hope that this maybe has been a little bit of an inspiration to work with us and go in that direction. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, James Balog, Nikon.